Good evening. I am Reverend Jamie Lee Sprague Ballou, and I am making this video. It is May 7th, 2020. I'm making this video for two reasons. One is for a class I'm taking here in Las Vegas at UNLV, which deals with the intersectionality of race, class, and gender. And then I also want to upload this video onto my YouTube platform because I did a posting several weeks ago on Facebook, and I talked about what we're going through and how I personally thought this virus that we're dealing with, this COVID-19, I felt that it was man-made. And I received a lot of flack on Facebook. And sometimes I believe people are afraid of the truth. They don't want to deal with the reality, or they're afraid of that. What they don't want to acknowledge. Maybe we've been lied to for so long in our country. They don't want to deal with the truth of the bad of our country. They only want to see us, our nation, as we are the good nation. We are they don't want to see our nation in any other way except for being the best people in the world. But then I also find that problematic. I find a lot of things in our nation problematic when we don't want to deal with the realities. And I guess I'm the mindset of, who was it, Augustine, that said we live in a world of false reality. And sometimes I think people don't want to deal with that, the truth of what is. They don't want to come out of that the cave and see what they've been seeing projected in front of them. They don't want to see what's behind what's been putting those images in front and see the truth of what lies behind them. They just want to keep seeing the false reality that's being painted. They want to keep believing a false narrative of the history of our country. They don't want to deal with the ugliness of our history within the U.S. And so as we're dealing with this COVID-19 and how does it affect race? How does it affect classism? And how does it affect gender? And that's why I want to make the topic of this video, because also during this year, while we're dealing with the COVID-19, this is a major election year. And I'm having some problems, struggles, ethically and morally, about this election coming up. And I will get into that. So let me let you two know that I am a pastor of a church affirming God's people. I am also Puerto Rican, German, Irish, so I'm multicultural. And I'm beginning to really learn the Spanish language, which is what I'm studying, majoring in Spanish at UNLV, because I want to learn my culture. You see, I grew up in New Jersey, and the only ones that really spoke Spanish in our household was my mom, my grandmother, and my aunt. And so none of us picked up the language. And as an adult, and when we moved from New Jersey, because we didn't really need to know how to speak Spanish in New Jersey. If I just lived in New Jersey, I I I probably wouldn't have even um, cared about learning the language Spanish. But moving out west, and you have so many, so much more Hispanics out here. That's a regret that I have, is not learning Spanish. And so now I am really trying to learn it. I'm in my second year of taking Spanish. So I'm in this class I'm taking this semester is Spanish 214. And then starting next semester, I'll move into the 300 levels of the Spanish level. So it really is intense, and it's time consuming to learn a language, especially I am, what, 57 years old, so it takes a little bit for me to pick it up and to try not, to overcome the wanting to take hear the language, then put it in my head, and then put it into English. I'm trying to cut that out and just go for learning the language and speaking the language and trying not so much the translation part of it within my head, because that makes it much more difficult. So I'm just trying to be that, what do you want to say, infant in a way of grasping and learning, like a child. Your mind is ripe. And sometimes as the older you get, it's harder to absorb as much because you've been conditioned and taught for so many ways. And that's like within our history. We have been conditioned to think about our country in ways that, we see ourselves as we are the dominant nation of this world. And I don't think that's always healthy of seeing it that way, because I think we're fooling ourselves. Um, so I don't want to get too much off topic. So I want to talk about a little bit about the intersectionality of how I see this, the race, class, and gender in the midst of the COVID-19, and then also within um, the election year here too. Um, how all of this is in play and how it benefits the dominant group. So I just told you that I'm Puerto Rican, German, Irish. I'm also a trans female. Um, and so there's intersectionality there between, and if you don't know what trans is, well, trans is simply, I used to be, I was born um, as male. But my brain was wired a little differently, and on the inside, I was always felt female. And so, it took me years to get to this point. And so, I finally had um, the surgery that I needed to to put my brain in alignment with my body. And it's something that, I am grateful I have been able to achieve. There's many um, in the trans community that will not get to achieve that, maybe, or it's a struggle for them to achieve it. And so I am blessed, and I'm glad I have been able to achieve it. I am also a Christian. I'm also a pastor of a church affirming God's people. So, and let's start with that. On March 13th, 2020, we were instructed by our governor here in and I'm going to just talk mostly about the Las Vegas economy right now, because that's where I live, and I can only tell you the experience here in Las Vegas and my own experience and what I'm seeing through this, especially as somebody who's a Christian too. I want to share that perspective with you. Um, and to tell you what I'm seeing from a Christian perspective on all this. So on March 13th, 2020, we were given a stay-at-home order to stay in place. except if you needed essentials, you can go to the grocery store, pick up your essentials and all that. And so a lot of businesses here in Las Vegas are closed, and especially the casinos. And and you can see it on my YouTube channel. A couple of weeks ago, my husband and I drove down the strip and we filmed it to show what it looked like. And it was at night. One of the most busiest places, because we are a tourist place, was so dead. It almost looked like a ghost town because there's nobody on the sidewalks and the casinos are all closed up. They have their lights on, but there's no activity inside of them right now. And you think about an economy that depends so much on tourism, well, that's Las Vegas. And so when our economy depends so much on tourism, there's a problem, because um, it becomes problematic because now the funds and the employment stops here, you know. And the only other event where it affected the strip was 9/11. But this is a lot worse than what 9/11 did to our economy here. And it's a lot worse for any place, you know. This is a global pandemic, not just Las Vegas, but it's global. So it's affecting everybody globally. But I want to talk about mostly here because that's what I can relate to, you know, and realizing that it is nationally here in the U.S. and global, that many places are feeling it. Maybe not so much in some of the rural areas because they're not, you know, having much infections yet. But once our society opens, it could easily be spread into the rural areas. So this is going to be a slow process on reopening our economy. But as a Christian, I have to wonder, because there was so much built into this virus. And I have to wonder about this virus. You see, because I don't believe God brings viruses onto us. I believe that somehow, because of everything, it's a cause and effect thing. So when we fell from God, we kind of brought judgment upon ourselves. And we fell from the grace of God. And we also brought evil onto ourselves. I believe we create evil. We don't need an image, somebody called Satan, to bring evil to us, because I think the human race does it to ourselves. So in some respects, I will say any virus, anything that comes to us, we bring it to ourselves. And that's the same with this virus. I think a virus like this has been a long time coming, and it's a result of what we do to the planet, what we do to our vegetables. You know, we spray insecticides on stuff. We're poisoning our own food. We're poisoning the air. We're poisoning the land. So it's bound to happen. And so instead of seeing this as a virus that was caused by the human race, what does our president say? That this virus was caused by China. There's racism in that logic. And if we think about our U.S. history and how tainted our history really has been, we are not a perfect nation. And if you think we're a perfect nation, then you're fooling ourselves. We need to deal with our ugliness. Because what I hope through this pandemic, once we pull through, that maybe we can become a better people. You know, we wake up and we learn how to relive again. Because I could see something happening here too. I can see a global reset. And maybe this is what the elites want. And maybe this is what the dominant group here wants. Because let's talk about that for a second. Because I told you about myself, the intersectionality of my race, my gender, um, and you can say maybe I'm a middle class person. So you have my class now. So you have my race, gender, and class. And especially in capitalism, it's all about the haves and the have-nots. And it's also within the world of what the elites have and what the rest of us don't have. The 1% of the world owns everything, and 99% of us are enslaved to the elites. 99%. And yet, we keep continuing to allow them to have their way when we buy into the systems that are governing us right now. So, what I'm saying here is, this year we have an election that's coming up, and we will go cast a ballot. And here in the U.S., we have primarily two parties, the Democrats and Republican. Most people this election will go vote according to their party lines. The problem with that is that the two candidates running this year fit in the mold of the dominant group, which has controlled America since the conception of us becoming a country, becoming America. And that dominant group is white, heterosexual, male, and being Christian. That's the dominant group within the U.S. that controls the law, pretty much governs the law of the land, and even the financial wealth and everything in the U.S. It favors that. Every law that is passed favors that particular group. And if you're not in that group, it makes it a little harder to have success here in the U.S. I'm not saying you can't achieve success, but it's harder. You have a lot more hurdles to climb. And I'm not saying every white, heterosexual, Christian male is, um, you know, is successful, because there are some that aren't. But the majority, and that's how this system is set up for white, heterosexual, um, Christian males to succeed in this society. It's structured around them. And if you don't believe it, look back throughout our history. Look from the time we landed here, what the history was with the control of the Native Americans, the indigenous people here, and if they didn't conform, they were killed. It was genocide on the indigenous people of this land. We didn't find a country. We stole country. We stole this country from the indigenous people. And if you think that's okay, maybe your theology's wrong if you say you're a Christian. To say that we have the right to come in, and just because we hand them a Bible, the killing we did to them was not justified. And so we have to admit the wrongs of our country, the wrongs of Christianity, because there's a lot of wrong in Christianity, in the history of Christianity. And if we can't admit that as Christians, then there's something wrong. We have to actually understand and, what it is when we talk about our history. And there's a lot of bloodshed in the Christian history and U.S. history that needs to be rectified and needs to change. And we have a history of oppression, all the isms that we have. And so because I don't want to run too long in this video, so let's talk about this COVID-19 and what I've seen so far with this. So I believe that this COVID-19 is, in a sense, a man-made virus, because I think we've caused this. And it's been a long time coming through everything we've done to the planet that we live on, to animals, to the destroying of trees, to the destroying of the ozone layer. Everything we do to the planet, to the oil spills. We have polluted and contaminated this earth. And so we're seeing judgment upon ourselves. God doesn't need to bring us judgment, but we're seeing that. But our president feeds us that this virus is started by the Chinese, and this is China attacking us. That's the narrative they want us to believe. Why? So they can further impose things against China. And isn't it just too coincidence that we seem to put this on China, the blame, because we say it started in Wuhan, and not owning it that this is a humanitarian problem, that it's the human race's problem, that it could, and who knows where really the original origins. That might have been the first where they were able to trace it from, but it could have been long before that. And so our media, our government tells us, and we start blaming China for this. And now we're going to have where we have repercussions against China. And we've been in the midst of a trade war with them, as our president wants this "Make America Great Again," which, when was America ever great? Because we've had all this bloodshed. It certainly wasn't when we were killing Native Americans. It certainly wasn't during the slavery period. It certainly wasn't when the LGBTQ community had to hide in closets because they're afraid to come out. So when was our perfect time in the U.S. history? Because we've had problems of racism, sexism, and classism. As long as there's oppression, we are not a perfect. We were never great. As long as there's oppression, we are not great. We were never great. And to say that let's make us great again, that could mean let's make us white again. That's the scary part. Well, it's not scary. Because, so now we're told to stay indoors during this COVID-19. We put the blame on China. So we have a race relationship there going. We're blaming a certain ethnic group. And prior to this, we're closing our borders against, people of color because we didn't want Hispanics coming into our land, because our president painted Hispanics as being terrorists, being rapists, being murderers. So we're slowly closing our borders, and now in the midst of this, we're really locking our borders because we want to keep our country safe. And so that's what we're being told. As a Christian, we are told not to fear. Do not fear. But yet, many people are having fear right now. And as Christians, we are to trust in God. Put our faith in God. And if we have faith in God, God will protect us. Because Jesus died for us. Jesus was the Lamb that shed his blood for us. Remember in the Exodus story, the plague that came upon Egypt, and the Israelites were instructed to smear the blood of the lamb on the doorpost. Well, what if you truly had faith during this time and smeared the blood of Jesus on your doorpost of your house, of your church, and truly believed that you are covered underneath the blood of the Lamb, that this plague too can pass over you? I have been having that faith because, you see, but I have to admit, I have a small congregation. The one thing that happened when they gave us that stay-at-home order on March 13th, myself and my congregation, we began to wonder, what about the homeless people? What are they going to do? See, we would all be home, being safe, staying at home underneath COVID-19, but what are the homeless people going to do? So we took on an initiative that we would start feeding them, because now many of the establishment where they would go into won't even allow them to go into the establishments anymore. And so many of the churches closed their doors, so now they don't even have places where they would go get food from, are not available to them. So we took up the initiative to feed them. We have opened our doors on Monday, Tuesday. We did have it open on Wednesday, but then we found out that the Episcopal Church right around the corner from us feeds them on Wednesday night. So we don't have it open on Wednesday night. But we have our doors open on Monday and Tuesday, Thursday and Friday. We do take off. We do honor the Sabbath. So after we're done feeding on Friday, we're done until, Saturdays. We enjoy Friday night through Saturday as our Sabbath. And then we have church on Sunday afternoon at 12:30 p.m. And then we feed after the worship service. And so what we do during the week on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday and Friday, we have them come to the door of our church, and we hand them out meals or sides, whatever we have for the day. Because during the week, I also, on Thursday or Friday, I'll go and pick up some food from El Pollo Locos that I have. I have 3 El Pollo Locos that I pick up food from. And I'll pick up the food, and this is food that they would normally toss away, and we repackage the food, and we'll make up small meals, or we make up containers of sides, like a side of rice, side of mashed potatoes, or whatever I pick up for that week. And then we freeze it, and then so we have like three good freezer size that we have in the church, and we freeze up the food, and then we'll nuke. So we've been getting like maybe 15 to 20 people a day that come, and we will feed them that evening. And we do it just once a day. We only feed at 5 o'clock, from 5 until 5:30, or until the food runs out. And so we normally have about 15 or 20 people that come, and we'll feed them. So we heat up the meals, and then we hand them a hot meal with some water to drink too. So that gives them a meal for the day to eat, so they don't go hungry. So we've been doing that each night. And then Sunday after worship service, we always have a meal afterwards. And that's been a tradition within our church. We always have a meal after service, because we believe that's one thing the Christian denomination, um, in the breaking of bread, it stems around eating, um, breaking bread with one another. And so you have to feed people physically if you expect to feed them spiritually. And so we take that on seriously as a church. If you're going to bring them in, um, you can't just try to feed them spiritually and let them walk out hungry physically, because otherwise they won't be fed. And so that is our mission as a church now. And we're seeing a little growth within our church, inviting the people without homes to come and sit with us, and treating them with dignity. So on Sunday mornings, they come in, they sit and have worship with us, and have a meal also. But then during the week, we keep them out, just because we are trying to keep somewhat of a social distance, and keep safe during this. But how much of this do we believe that the government is feeding us? Because I have to say, um, if I trust in God, there's a certain point where I have to believe that God has God's hands upon me. That if I smear the blood of the Lamb upon myself, then I believe this plague will bypass. I believe we can protect ourselves. So I really try to live hard by faith, and I'm willing to um, to help those who are in need. And I have to wonder, because so many churches have closed their doors. And that's where I have to wonder, is this where God is testing churches? Um, in a time like this, you know? Um, why couldn't other churches do the same thing? If they have a large congregation, I understand that you don't want to have all your congregation to come in on a Sunday morning. But what about catering and opening your doors to the church so you can feed the homeless? Do it like we're doing. Feed it outside your doors. But too many churches are closed right now. So how are they being the church to the people who most need it if they're closed? And so that's where I think something has been speaking to me during this time. As far as churches that just are letting the government take control of the churches. And what are we giving up? How much of our rights are we giving up for safety? And some of this, I believe, is written in the Bible. Um, you know, I believe each day we wake, we're closer. We're closer to that appointed time in which Christ will come again for his people. Especially if we truly believe in the mystery of faith. Christ has died, Christ was risen, Christ will come back again. then why are we having doubt that maybe this could be close to time? We should always be prepared for that time. And so I'm choosing not to live so much in fear, but to work on doing what I'm called to do during this time. And that's to take care of the least. And that is where we're also seeing the separation of the have and have nots during this COVID-19, the classism. And our country is great at separating and using events like this to separate more from the haves and have-nots. Because believe me, as we are slowly opening back up, we're going to see a lot of displaced workers. I believe we're going to see a lot more homeless problems out there. This is not going to be an easy fix. So we have racism happening during this COVID-19. We have classism happening during COVID-19. Now, what about gender? Sexism. Well, this presidency has been filled with transphobiaism because remember, through his presidency, he has put a ban on trans in the military, and during his presidency, he has allowed the states the right to discriminate against the LGBTQ community. So this president is very homophobic, very transphobic, and this administration is very transphobic, homophobic, and we're seeing that play out during these past few years, the 3 years that he's been in office. There has been a rollback on our rights within the country for the LGBTQ community. Now we have two candidates running for president. Look at the two candidates. They're both white men. They're both heterosexual men. And they both claim to be Christians. Here's the problem with both candidates that I see. They both have a history. They both have been accused of inappropriate action with women. And yet, we're going to have an election on November 3rd, 2020. And people are going to go into that voting booth and they're going to pull a lever for either the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate. Both in that dominant group who have exploited and who have degraded women. For myself, I find it a little troubling that we will say, well, I'm going to vote for the lesser of two evils. Is that the direction of our country that we want to keep going? Because I find that problematic. I really do. How can we justify and say, I'm going to vote for the lesser of two evils? What makes one better than the other when they're both doing the same thing as far as sexism? And what does that say to the Me Too movement? What does that say about to women's voices? All for political gain. I think we need to seriously stop and think about this. And think about our two political party system here in the US. Because right now, I think voting Democrat or Republican is really buying into a system that keeps the isms in play, that keeps oppression in play. In this unprecedented times, what would it be like if we changed who we are as a society? What if we brought down the system that we're living in and change it? And instead of voting for red or blue, we started voting for independent people that are running to try to make a difference of our country. And we're voting for people that are individuals and not controlled by a political party. And we start having term limits, and we start making it so our government is not corrupt. To me, there's no better time in our history than to change the course we're on. Because if we march into that booth on November 3rd and continue to pull the lever for red or blue, we're allowing the dominant group of our nation to stay in power and to keep the isms in play. This is just my opinion. And I hope you can understand what I'm saying. What if we started thinking of other ways instead of being controlled by this currency that has no value to it anymore? What if we learned to live in communities with one another and treating people equally and taking care of the least of those and making sure people have a roof over their heads, and we learn how to barter with one another? If I have seeds that I want to sell to somebody because maybe I want a blouse, because I want to look good, maybe I can barter some seeds for a blouse. That's the type of currency we should have, where we're helping one another. And if we read in Acts, where that's what was happening with the apostles, they were building communities where everybody sold their possessions and they were helping one another, working with one another. And it was bringing people in, growing. Maybe we need to take a step back as a society and not become so much capitalists, but working with each other and treating people like God's children, like God's people. So I'm going to leave the video here tonight on May 7th, 2020, and say God bless you and thank you. Hope to see you again.